Sharon was looking for a place to rent, and she spent hours and hours looking through different rooms and apartments. The prices were way out of her budget. She felt like she would have to have a super high-paying job to even pay the rent, don't mind the cost of living on top of that. She kept looking at different houses, and there was a great choice, but that great choice came with an even greater price. And not greater as in value, but greater as in a very high price. She was about to give up when she had to look twice to see, was she seeing things, or were her eyes playing tricks on her from staring at the screen for so long. There was a really nice apartment complex in what looked like a lovely neighbourhood near where she wanted to rent. What caught her eye was rent a room and living room plus use of swimming pool, entirely free in this beautiful spacious house in a beautiful neighbourhood. You will be able to stay indefinitely, but just need to take part in a training session to help finding ways of bettering ourselves through a modern day type of experimental wellness therapy. When she scrolled down to the bottom of the page, under the photo of the complex, it had written in bold red writing, "If interested, please reply as soon as possible, as there is only a few positions to be filled." The complex can hold plenty people, as it has more than 30 spacious bedrooms and leisure rooms, etc. But apply right away if interested, before spaces are gone. Sharon didn't even begin to consider not applying when she had already clicked on the button below which said apply now. She filled in all the information and was delighted when she got a reply back saying, "Thank you for applying to stay in the Wellness Mansion. You just have started the journey to changing your life, to bring out the best in you." Sharon wondered what exactly did the experimental wellness therapy mean, but she guessed it couldn't mean anything bad. A week later, Sharon was in her new room in the Wellness Mansion. She felt like being in a posh hotel. Her room had a TV and was decorated beautifully. She was lying on her bed relaxing, scrolling through Instagram on her phone when a man entered. He smiled and said, "Hello Sharon, and good evening to you. Welcome to the Wellness Mansion. You must have read what it said on the site about this being the first step of your journey to becoming a better you. And that is true. But that phone you were just looking at, I'm afraid, has to go. You will not have to worry about food or any bills, just as once you 100% apply yourself to this therapy." Sharon said, "Well, I'm afraid I need my phone, as I have to stay up to date with all my social media feeds. But don't worry, I won't be on my phone all the time." The man said, "I'm very sorry, dear. I need your phone right now, or else I'm afraid you need to exit this Wellness Mansion and make room for someone who will apply themselves fully to our rules." Sharon felt a pang of fear and dread, wondering what he meant by apply themselves fully to our rules. Suddenly she feared she just made a terrible mistake coming to the Wellness Mansion. A few hours later, the same man came into her room and said, "Okay dear, we will be doing the first test run of what's to come. You might think this is a bit of real heavy work and feel like not even trying, but if you do, then I'm afraid you will not be able to live in this wonderful house rent-free. But if you do apply yourself to this very, very simple test, then you, my dear, will be qualified to stay here, and we will teach you to be the best version of you." What Sharon was told to do was do exercise until an alarm went off. She was given different exercises and thought it would be just a few minutes, but she nearly passed out a few times as each exercise went on for what seemed like hours. Each time the alarm went off, she just had a few minutes to organise what she needed for the next one and had to do the exercise non-stop until the alarm went off. After the last alarm went, the man entered Sharon's room and clapped, saying, "Well done, my dear. You did absolutely fabulous. You now have full use of this house." The next day, Sharon was walking down the hall when a man said to her, "Hello, how are you doing?" Sharon said, "I'm great, thanks. I'm a bit stressed though about what I was made do last night." The man's pleasant expression changed, and he grabbed Sharon by the throat and said, "Don't complain. You don't know how good you have it. Just do what you're told, and if not, then you will suffer. But on the other hand, if you do what you're told, you will gain more than happiness. You will gain euphoria." Sharon was shaking with fear after the man said what he said. He let go of her and she ran back into her room and shut the door. She shook in fear, realizing that there was no bolt in the inside to lock herself in. The next day she was made do extreme exercises for hours and hours, and when she told them she wanted to go home, a man gave her a phone to scroll through the photos and said, "That is what happened the last person who wanted to go home." She nearly got sick when she saw different photos of a person being brutally tortured in different ways. There was a weird red siren in the background where the man was being tortured. She asked what was the siren there for. The man said, "Thanks for showing interest. Well, just put it this way. Hopefully you will never see that siren go red and flash, because if you do, then that's the end of you." Suddenly Sharon got her fork and stuck it in the man's eye while she stuck the knife in his neck and ran out the door. She was feeling lucky that no one was in the hall to stop her, and before she knew it, luckily she was outside, safe in the street. She ran across the road and an elderly lady said, "Oh my goodness, dear, what's wrong? Please come in, dear." Sharon was shouting, "Help me, call the police, please call the police," and was about to go in the door when she saw something in the window of the woman's house. It was a red siren. The man's words came flooding back to her. Hopefully she will never see the siren flash, because if she did, it was the end of her. Sharon had realized the woman must have been one of them. She ran down the street, but as she ran, she noticed on every single window, in every single house, there was a red siren flash. She panicked as she was surrounded by people all over the street, and she knew there was no escape. Death. That was the odour that occupied the room. The pungent smell of vomit and sweat was evident, but the stench of rotting, dead flesh was predominant. David looked fearfully at his mother, lying helpless on the bed. He knew she was sick, but the sight of her disease-eaten flesh made him feel an array of emotions. with fear being the front runner. He was scared for his mother. He did not want her to die, but the fear was also for his own well-being. The imminent fear that it could be contagious made him keep his distance. His father sat holding his mother's hand. The bits of the hand that remained, that is. The disease had stripped his caregiver of most of the muscle and flesh she had once used to nurture and care for him. All the money and power his father had was of no use against a disease such as this. World-renowned doctors and specialists had been called as soon as his mother had exhibited signs of the sickness. All to no avail. Disease does not discriminate. Janice was suffering just as the poor do, dying with no means of recovery. Necrotizing facets was the name for what ailed his mother. He had heard it on the news a while before he saw it plague his mother. The flesh-eating disease. Or if the stories he had heard around school before it closed were anything to go on, the zombie disease was a more applicable diagnosis. The fever and nausea were the first symptoms. Janice was unable to take her son to school, lying weak in her bed with her temperature climbing steadily. David's father, Jonathan, put it down to a bug of sorts and simply picked up the slack by doing the duties around the house his wife was unable to do. By the second week of sickness, Janice was completely unable to move, with her fingers and toes taking on a darkish hue. David had continued to go to school and had heard of many of the kids talk about other people suffering from a similar sounding sickness. But in all the stories he had heard, none of them ended well. Fearing for his mother's health, David repeated these stories to his father, only to be met with reassurance and comfort. That reassurance and comfort proved to be meaningless as he now sat looking at the disease-riddled body of his mother, flesh eaten beyond comprehension, holes gaping in places unimaginable. Jonathan had tried his best by all means. As soon as he saw his wife's condition deteriorate, a number of doctors were called for consultation. They all came to the same prognosis. According to the doctors looking after her, she was one of the first to be stricken by the disease, and just as the others had, her condition had progressed. Their only suggestion was to move her to the hospital wing they had designated to those afflicted with the disease. Before moving her, Jonathan thought to take David to see the hospital where they would care for his mother. They discussed the matter with her and decided to make the trip the next day. "You've been avoiding me, baby," Janice said once alone with David. "I'm just scared, Mum. I don't want you to die," came David's reply. Laughing, Janice told David, "That's not something you need to worry about, my son. What you do need to worry about is how comfy my room there is going to be," joining in with his mother's laughter. David finally dropped his inhibitions and sat close to his mother. Resting his head on her bed, she stroked his head as he fell asleep. He had not slept long at the bedside of his mother, but his dreams were those of zombies and those that hunted. Necrotizing facets. His father woke him to go to bed, and the disturbance of the dreams was a thorough welcome by David. Walking half asleep towards the door, he could but help glance back at his mother. He could feel the tears well up as the woman lying in the bed closely resembled those creatures that haunted his dream. The drive to the hospital the next day was excruciating. The silence seemed to drill deep into David's core as he sat next to his father. He could feel the sadness and pain emanating from the man he had always viewed as an absolute pillar of strength and wisdom. When the journey had finally ended and they sat in the car park of the hospital, David suddenly burst into tears. The stark reality of the possibility of losing his mother had hit him like a freightliner moving at remarkable speeds. His father hesitated for a second, unsure of what the appropriate response would be, given that he too felt so unable to do anything he wanted to cry to. He held his son. The two embraced tightly and said nothing. No words could have helped either feel better. The dark clouds drifting in the sky outside them closely resembled the way both of them felt inside, cold and lost. The bright lights in the hospital corridor beat down on them. They winced as they walked in, waiting for their eyes to adjust. "Good morning. We're here to view and book a room in the CDC wing, please," Jonathan asked. We're sorry to inform you. There has been an incident in the CDC room, sir. We're not accepting any new patients at the moment." "What? That's preposterous. What kind of incident?" Jonathan shouted at the nurse. Before she could answer, the doors to the CDC wing burst open, and what looked like the remains of a man ran through the doors, leaving footprints of blood behind him. He lunged at a woman seated on the chairs outside the Centre for Disease Control, and people were too shocked to respond. Pinning her down, Jonathan and David could see the sick man biting and clawing at the woman's face. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. He had more holes in him than flesh. Bits of bone could be seen through the loose hanging hospital gown that covered the eaten man. The disease had all but devoured his body, and it was a miracle he was able to move. "Does that answer your question, sir?" the nurse screeched as she made a beeline for the exit. Dragging David, Jonathan followed the panicked crowds through the door and towards the car park. The only people left in the hospital were the zombie-looking individual and his victim. Well, what was left of her after he had eaten his fill and pulled all her intestines out through the hole he had chewed in her stomach. Rushing to get in the car, David and Jonathan said nothing as they ran and pushed their way through the crowds to get where they were going. Locking themselves in their car, they merely sat where they were, not moving and not saying anything, bursting into tears once again. David was the only one to finally break the silence. "We have to get home to Mom, Dad." As they pulled into the driveway, Jonathan had already begun giving David instructions. "As soon as we get in, you need to go up to your room and pack a bag. We're going to go straight to the airport and get on a plane to India. Your Uncle Kieran mentioned something about doctors working on stuff like this there. We'll take your mother and this will be all sorted out. Come straight to the room when you're packed." Almost as soon as the car was stationary, David leapt out of the car and ran up the driveway and into his house. Jonathan was close behind. As Jonathan made his way into his bedroom, he could hear his son cursing and banging his cupboard doors. He too would pack a bag for him and his wife, and they would leave to a safer place. Having finished packing some clothes into a bag, David closed it and ran out of his room. The tears had begun to dry, and a smile crept over his face at the thought of 3 of them flying to India to make Mum better. Who knows, maybe Uncle Kieran would be waiting at the airport for them. Bursting through the door of his parents' room, the smile that had recently formed once again dissolved to tears. There would be no trip to the airport, let alone India. Straddling her husband on their bed, David could see his mother. Her head was buried in her husband's chest as she feasted. Jonathan's hand dangled off the bed, drenched in his own blood. The only thing David could hear over his loud breaths was the grotesque sound of his mother chewing and slurping the bits of flesh and blood she was stuffing her face with. Standing there frozen, David saw his mother turn to face him. What now looked him in the eye was not his mother. Blood dripping from its chin, dead eyes staring, it stood up, leaving Jonathan lying on the bed with holes chewed in his body. David felt his legs give out. "Mom?" he said weakly, tears streaming down his cheeks, hoping something inside of the creature would hear and recognize her son, and perhaps grant him mercy. The ground seemed to shake as it took a step towards him. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content, then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Susie was walking down the road one night in the countryside when she was surprised by hearing a phone box ring. She wondered who would be calling a public phone box, especially in the middle of nowhere. Well, it was near a bus stop, but besides that, no one was around, unless they were waiting for the bus, of course. She had decided to answer the phone when she was surprised to hear a man's voice. "Hello, is anyone there?" Susie said. "Hello, yes, I'm here. I'm sure you must have the wrong number. This is a public phone box." The man spoke again. "Oh, maybe I did call the wrong number, but thank you very much for answering and letting me know. I must say, you have a very nice voice. I am very sorry if I put you out of your way, but it was very nice to speak to you anyway. I guess you must be wondering why I'm calling a public phone box. Well, it was very nice to speak to you. I hope you're having a good night." Susie felt strange, a stranger calling a phone box, asking her was she having a good night, but she liked how he spoke, so replied, "Yes, I'm having a great night, thanks for asking. I'm just waiting for the bus to go home now." The man said, "Oh, I'm very glad to hear you're having a good night. So the public phone box is near a bus stop then, I gather." Susie was enjoying the chat with the man, but realised the bus was coming, so quickly said, "I'm very sorry, I have to go. The bus is coming. It was nice talking to you. Bye." The man said, "It was very splendid talking to you also. Bye now." Susie walked into the bus and felt happy for some strange reason. About the phone call, the man had left a good impression on her. She was wondering, was it his voice or what he said, and she wondered what he had looked like. When she got home, she told her sister Rachel all about it. "I was waiting for the 10 o'clock bus, and well, I was very surprised to hear the public phone ring in the phone box right next to the bus stop. I answered it, and there was this really sweet man on the other end, and, well, we had a lovely chat, but unfortunately the bus came before I could even tell him my name." Her sister smiled and said, "Wow, what age was he? I wonder what he looked like. Maybe he looked like a film star." Susie said, "I'm not sure what age he was, and of course I have no idea what he looked like, but he seemed so sweet. Rachel said, "Are you going to wait at the bus stop again tomorrow night to see if he calls?" How do you expect him to call the same phone box again at the same time? It obviously was a wrong number he dialed. But the next night, Susie made sure to be waiting for the 10 o'clock bus again, and was pleasantly surprised when the phone rang again. She ran into it and answered. "Hello? Hello, Susie. I am very happy that you were waiting for the bus again, and you answered the phone. I was hoping you would. I hope you're happy that I rang this phone again. Are you, Susie?" Susie said, "Well, yes, I kind of enjoyed speaking to you last night." The man said, "Well, that is splendid. Our feelings are mutual then. Tell me, Susie, is there anyone else waiting for the bus? Are you alone?" Susie said, "Yes, I'm alone. This is a very quiet road, you see. Not many people ever wait for this bus." The man said, "Oh, it must be in the middle of the country then, Susie, since not many people catch the bus." Susie saw the bus coming up the road and said to the man, "I'm sorry, the bus is here." The man said, "How about we continue our conversation tomorrow night? Same time, Susie?" Susie agreed. The next night at the same time, the phone rang again. The man said, "Susie, I'm not sure I even told you my name. My name is Fred, Susie, and do you know, I love your voice, but I would love to be able to put a face to that voice. How about we meet in person, Susie? Would you like that?" Susie thought about it, then quickly said, "Well, yes, if you would like that, sure." She gave him the directions to the phone booth and told him she would meet him at 9:30 tomorrow night. Back at Susie's house, her dad was reading a newspaper article about a serial killer at large in their locality and the surrounding areas of the countryside around their village. He was worried she was out late and was just about to call the police when she had walked in the door. Susie felt a strange feeling. It was like she was in love. She felt it strange knowing that she hadn't even met the man, but still felt strangely in love with him. She told her sister about her meeting him tomorrow night. The next day, when Susie asked to go out, her dad said, "No way, you're not going anywhere tonight." Susie was mad until her sister had an idea that maybe he would allow both girls go to the cinema together. Rachel was going to the cinema while Susie would meet the man. Rachel said to Susie, "Look, Susie, I was thinking about this. Maybe it's a bad idea. You were going to meet this man. I mean, he could be anyone. He could be a madman for all we know." Susie laughed it off and said she would meet him, and was sure he would be a really sweet guy. When Susie was on the bus, she heard a conversation between two people who were talking about a serial killer at large, a man who was targeting young women. Susie felt sick thinking of the stranger she was about to meet. She stayed on the bus and knew she couldn't go home, so she would go back to the cinema and join Rachel. But Rachel was worried about her sister and had already gone to meet her by the phone box. When Rachel was outside the phone box, she had been calling her sister's name, but all she could hear was her own echo. Suddenly a man walked out from the ditch and said, "Hello, Susie. It is so great to finally meet you." Rachel froze as the man went near her and she kicked him. The man said, "Oh, now, that's very nasty out of you, Susie. Very nasty indeed, and I have to punish you for that." He dragged her into his car and put her in the boot and shut it. I had a very tragic event happen in my home years and years ago. I was left a mansion in an estate in the middle of the country, and trust me, it was a very beautiful, mystical place. You could see the history written all over it. But one day I had a falling out with a man. That man was my uncle. He was left money, but that's it. But you see, he wanted to claim some of the land around the mansion, and no matter how many times I told him that none of the land was his, he wasn't having it. One night I eventually called a truce, but in reality I had planned on murdering him, which I did. I poisoned his wine and hid him down in the wine cellar. I tied him up to the wall with shackles to make the most of the space, and built bricks around him to suit the rest of the wall. I tried to do it perfectly, whereas people would think it was just a part of the wall. For years and years I felt an eerie atmosphere in the house, and I just put it down to my nerves over what I did. Thankfully, he didn't seem to haunt the place like you'd see in some spooky houses, where paintings would float along the air, etc. One night I brought a beautiful lady I met down in the village home for dinner. We were enjoying the dinner, but she didn't really like the wine I chose. I asked her to choose one below in the cellar, proud of my collection of wines over the years. I must have collected hundreds of bottles of wine. The girl went down to the cellar and was in awe with all the different wines I had on display. I was standing back wondering what she would choose. Suddenly I noticed something strange when she handed me a bottle that stood to hairs on the back of my neck. It was the same brand of wine I used to poison my uncle. It wasn't the same bottle, of course, but the exact same brand. She gave me a smile, and there was something in her eyes. Had she known that my uncle had been poisoned by me, using this brand? Was she just playing a sick game with me before calling the police? Was she the police? All different questions swam around in my head until I realized something was moving. It didn't make a sound, but it was definitely moving. I panicked, but couldn't let her notice the fear. She'd turn around if she noticed. I had fear over what was happening before me, behind her. What I was seeing with my own eyes, but what I could not make any sense of. What I saw was a brick move, and my uncle's huge eye stared out at me. I remember he had lost an eye in the war, but I hadn't seen that eye for years, not since the day I killed him. I told the girl we should go up to finish our meal. It will be getting cold. She gave me a quizzitive look, as she knew we had practically finished our dinner already. Suddenly she turned around and screamed when she saw my uncle's eyes staring right at her from the wall. I didn't know what was happening. How could my uncle be alive? I had to stop her screaming. I had to stop her screaming. It kept getting louder and louder, so I grabbed the bottle and smashed it over her head. As she fell to the ground, my uncle burst through the wall and looked at me sadistically and said, "That girl could have chosen any bottle out of your huge collection. But will I tell you why she chose that one? Because I summoned her, here to take her soul, to bring me back to life."